Twice Are. This is James, aka JP Harker. Also, happy Halloween, also happy Calan Gaeaf, also happy Samhain, and so on and so forth. Because these reviews are done for the spooky season, as the kids these days call it. Now, in honour of this, I am of course wearing black as a complete departure from my usual wardrobe. But because the spooky season approaches also the festive season, I'm naturally wearing my Nakatomi Plaza hoodie. Because yes, it is a Christmas film. I'm going to be looking at 3 books that I have read or reread in a tribute to this spookiest of seasons. Now, I've only got 2 of the paperbacks, because the other one I listened to as an audiobook. And they are Shelley's Frankenstein, Stoker's Dracula, and I am only going to mention in passing The Invisible Man. Purely because it's very short, I only listened to it as an audiobook, and I don't see why it became so popular. I mean, I'm going to say something awfully similar about Frankenstein soon. But The Invisible Man, in the title it gives away what's going to happen, which is fair enough. So it means at the start, when we have this mysterious stranger who's all wrapped up in this muffler, okay, we have the old dramatic irony of the audience knowing what the characters don't. But it goes on for so long that it becomes frustrating. Not only that, by the time we've passed that point and it's, okay, we're now realizing it's an invisible man who did it through weird science, we reach what I think is the next problem with it. He's not a very sympathetic character. You feel bad for what's happened to him, but then you realise he's actually quite content to be like this as long as he can get away with what he wants to get away with. And that means there's no mystery anymore. There's no sympathy for the protagonist anymore. You've got sympathy for his academic friend who's torn between whether to shelter him or to turn him in. And by the time you get anywhere with that, it's as good as over. And I must at some point watch Claude Rains doing it and see if that makes a difference and if that's a good adaptation and see what happens with it, because I honestly don't see what the fuss was about. And on that note, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. How did this become so popular? We have in this, and I did mark it, I think it's about the 50-page mark. Yes. We have in this him making the monster. And it takes, I think, between page 48 when he's starting to realise, yes, I could do it, and page 58 when, yeah, I did it and I didn't like it. And the rest of it is all about self-pity. It's all about how dreadful it is that I made this thing. Woe is me. Yes, I know that Adam has an intelligence, but really this is all so terribly against nature. What a dreadful mistake I have made. How awful. It's just so much of this is self-pity. Genuinely, the only bits of it I enjoyed were the bits that I recognised as quotes from Gene Wilder in Young Frankenstein, where in that film he reads from the book. So, what is it? Until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke in upon me, a light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that I became dizzy with the immensity of the prospect which it illustrated. I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation and life. Nay more, I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. I couldn't read that and not read it in the voice of Gene Wilder with his wonderful staring eyes and the wonderful performance he gives in that film. For a comic film, it has some cracking, dramatic performances from Wilder. And it probably says a great deal about this book that I've shown more animation and enthusiasm about a character in a comic parody of it than I did about the novel itself. I can understand that at the time the concept was very interesting, and there's plenty of things to make you feel clever in this, plenty of little references to Dante, and plenty of references to the Bible, and some pseudo-science. So I can get how the idea behind it is a good idea. But the way in which it is put across, I just found so dull. It was a chore to get through this, and yeah, there's not a lot more to say. I do not like this book and would not recommend it. So if you're feeling like reading something spooky this spooky season, don't go for this. Tell you what you should go for is this, Dracula by Bram Stoker. I first read this when I was a teenager. And yes, in my school they passed around copies of Interview with the Vampire, and I read that because we were all watching Buffy back then. And I read that because my peer group were reading it, so I'll try this, it's an original vampire book. And it was only alright. I didn't really want to read the others that were knocking about. But my sister did have this, and I thought, well, this is the original vampire book. Original novel, anyway. The legends, I appreciate, are older. Let's have a go at this. And for something written so much earlier, and in such an unusual style, it's so much more engaging. The first time I read it, I did find it a difficult slog, even though it was interesting. I've reread it a couple of times since, and it gets better with each reread. Now, for them as don't know, Dracula isn't written as your normal novel. It's written in a series of diary excerpts and some newspaper cuttings and things, and we learn at the end, minor spoiler, this book is like 150 years old, minor spoiler, some of our heroes survive, and they compiled everyone's diaries and everyone's records of events, and they've put it together into this. So we start with a very long chunk from the same diary to get us into it, and then we alternate between we've got a big chunk of Jonathan Harker's diary, and we've got she's not Mina Harker at the time, she's Mina Murray at the time, and Lucy Westerner and Jack Stewart, and eventually Van Helsing as well. We have all of their diary entries as they go through it, and it takes a bit of getting used to, but it actually works really well. You may or may not have guessed from my own pen name that Jonathan Harker is my favourite character in this, because he is the most admirable character. Everyone is facing some form of difficulty in this. Everyone's facing challenges. He's the only one who faces it completely alone. And that, to me, is what makes him the most admirable and courageous of all of them. Mina obviously goes through a terrible ordeal, so does Lucy. All of the guys are faced with dreadful grief and pressure, so Arthur and Seward and Quincy. And of course you've got the awful stuff happening with Renfield. But all of them, with the exception of Renfield, where it's not much support, they all have some support around them. They have somebody nearby who is looking out for them. Even if they're struggling to do it, even if they can't do much good, there's someone there. Harker, his terrible ordeal is a complete shock in the middle of nowhere. He is hundreds of miles from the nearest person he knows. He's hundreds of miles from the nearest person who speaks the same first language. He's getting by speaking German, and the Count is learning English. But his isolation and the courage he still shows throughout, and this terrible discovery that he slowly makes. That, to me, is what makes him the admirable one, and that is why I use his name for my pen name. But, yes, quite apart from that brilliant gothic creepy opening, and the slow dramatic irony used well through the rest of the book, where we know who the Count is and what all this is probably about, but the others are slowly discovering it, and Harker coming back and all that, all brilliant. And arguably the funnest part of this is that what defeats Dracula in the end is good admin. Speaking as a man who works in NHS admin and has done for the last decade at least, decade and a half, I do appreciate the value of good admin, good administration. And yes, their courage and such like is very, very important, and faith is made a great deal of in this, in the defeat of Dracula. Who, I made a note, yes, it is said that he is the Voivod Dracula who defeated the Turks. So there is a bit of back and forth. Did he really mean Vlad Tepes to base Dracula on? To maybe, maybe not. I'm saying it's 90% that it was. The fact that he's described as the Dracula who defeated the Turks, well, that's either Vlad the First or Vlad the Second. Sorry, Vlad the Second or Vlad the Third. So Vlad Dracul or Vlad Dracula. And Stoker may not have known much about him, but that's clearly where the influence came from, whatever that Count Vampire thing was about. But yes, the things that really beat him are the fact that Arthur Holmwood has money for bribes, because apparently all poor people are drunkards. That is a common thing. All the labourers always complain that they're thirsty and need to be paid off with drink. Or if dusty work's at dusty work. But it's the money, and Mina says all the remarkable power of money, but it's also the fact that everyone has written everything down, and it's not that big a conceit. Jonathan is a diary keeper, and by his influence, Mina has become one. Makes sense. The two doctors, Van Helsing and Seward, keep notes because they are medical men who keep notes. That makes sense. So it's... And when Lucy sort of does her contributions and what have you, it makes sense. It doesn't feel like too much of a plot convenience. But what's brilliant is they have all these... Everyone's keeping diaries in different places. What saves the day is Mina typing it all up into a single document. That's what saves the day, because they all read through it and they all work out what's been happening. And it means you don't have to have any repetition of dialogue, or not much of it. You don't have to have any... what feels like a cheat of, we sat down and I told them everything. Chapter ends. Next chapter. We know everything now. There is that thing of, no, we all kept diaries because that's what a lot of us do, and Mina here, she's a really good typist. So, yeah, we just got them all together, put them in one big document. Now we all know everything about Dracula. And it's like, yeah, the devil is defeated by admin. I like it. So, yes, I'm going to end on that rather chirpy note. I'm not going to go into detail of the plot of either of these. They are so well known through the films. I would just recommend one over the other for here's a look at how the original plot worked. I maintain the Gary Oldman film is arguably still the most loyal film, even though it adds a bunch of stuff. It's loyal to the vibe and loyal to an awful lot of the plot and dialogue. I'm just going to chuck that in at the end. I'll now end the video like I was going to about a minute ago before I started thinking, oh, I wanted to talk about the film. And I will end it here. So, Invisible Man, I don't have it with me, it was an audiobook. It's not a very long audiobook. I wouldn't bother with it myself. We have Shelley's Frankenstein. Avoid this like Black Death. It's just not worth it. And Bram Stoker's Dracula. Don't get put off by the unusual, setup, the unusual structure. Don't get put off by that too early on. You do get used to it. And it's well worth it, it is. I can see why this became a classic and why it's a Penguin popular classic. Yeah, I'm going to leave that at that. I'm going to stop gushing about this book because it was such an enjoyable read/reread. And I think that is a suitable ending to this Halloween-esque little readathon I've been doing, and I shall leave it at that. So enjoy your Halloween, enjoy your Calan Gaeaf, enjoy your Samhain, and enjoy your All Saints' Day the next day. This is James, aka JP Harker. Will Vowed.